Good morning and welcome to this historic event. My name is Mervyn Broom. I am the board chair of the Black Cultural Society and your host for today. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in the Mi'kmaq, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are privileged and thankful to be holding this event today on land that is covered by the historic treaties of peace and friendship. We also acknowledge that people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years, and we honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. Please stand for O Canada and lift every voice and sing on video. Please be seated. Thank you. And now I would like to call on Honorable Twyla Gross, Minister of African Nova Scotia Affairs and Public Service Commission, to give remarks.
Your Honor, Lieutenant Governor Arthur LeBlanc, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and cherished members of our community, today as we come together to celebrate Heritage Day 2024. We are reminded of what makes this day so special. It's a day to honor the remarkable people, events, and places that have woven the rich tapestry of Nova Scotia's history. This year, our Heritage Day honoree is from the African Nova Scotian community. And I am delighted that this year's celebration aligns with African Heritage Month, underscoring the importance of recognizing and celebrating the diverse stories that make up our collective histories here in Nova Scotia. Let's talk about William Hall. His story is a beacon of resilience and bravery for all of us in Nova Scotia, from our ancestors to today's generation. Born in 1829 in Hansport, Nova Scotia, William grew up along the banks of the Avon River. His parents, Jacob and Lucinda Hall, were former African-American slaves who sought freedom in Nova Scotia during the War of 1812. Inspired by his father's work in shipbuilding, William embarked on a career in the Royal Navy, serving for 24 years and rising to the rank of quartermaster. William was known for his steadfast courage, distinctively described as steady as a rock under fire. He made history as the first Nova Scotian, the first African Nova Scotian, and the first Canadian sailor to receive the Victoria Cross, the highest honor for bravery in the British Empire. We are very proud to have his original medal here today. But William's story also reflects a part of our collective history that we're still learning from. Despite his monumental achievements, he was initially buried in an unmarked grave on the Canadian East Coast. Military honors. It took 30 years for his family and community to right this wrong. In 1945, they ensured William Hall was reburied with the respect he deserved at the Hansport Baptist Church near Minas Basin in Nova Scotia. 2 years later, among his contributions, celebrating William Hall today, we are reminded of the resilience, courage, and determination of the Nova Scotian community. His story highlights the significant contributions African Nova Scotians have made to our province's heritage and emphasizes the importance of recognizing and celebrating these contributions. As we reflect on Heritage Day this year, let's shared history, celebrating our diverse heritage and working together towards an even more inclusive and equitable future for all Nova Scotians. Let us remember our heritage unity today and every day. I thank you.
Now I'd like to call on His Honor, the Honorable Arthur J. LeBlanc, Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia, to give his remarks. Thank you.
Well, good morning, former Lieutenant Governor Francis, Minister Gross, Admiral Kurtz, Honorary Colonel Gibson, MLAs, MPs, distinguished guests, ladies, gentlemen, and friends. Well, good morning, bonjour, quoi. As the King's representative in Nova Scotia, it is indeed a great pleasure to join you for Heritage Day, as we recognize and celebrate the life and service of William Hall, one of Nova Scotia's greatest heroes. Et à titre de représentant du roi en Nouvelle-Écosse, c'est un plaisir de me joindre à vous à l'occasion de la journée du patrimoine, alors que nous reconnaissons et célébrons la vie de William Hall. I had the honor of getting to know a great deal about William Hall. Patsy and I were privileged to be present at the naming ceremony and to host the Assumption of Command ceremony for the senior leadership of HMC Hall at Government House. Well, we also know William Hall because he has a connection to Government House, because his painting is on display. Appropriately, the painting was commissioned by my predecessor, the Honorable Dr. Mayanne E. Francis, the first African Nova Scotian to serve as the Crown's representative in our province, and only the third Black Canadian to serve in a vice-regal office. Premier néo-écossais et première personne d'ascendance africaine à se voir décerner notre plus haute distinction pour acte de vaillance, William Hall occupe une place prépondérante dans notre histoire militaire et sociale. Ayant reçu la Croix de Victoria, une décoration de notre régime de distinction honorifique, il fait partie du groupe des personnes les plus remarquables et les plus vaillantes des 170e dernières années. A man who served Queen and country with distinction, Hall would return to a quiet life as a gentleman farmer, Royal Navy. One can only imagine, despite his heroic deeds, the degree of racism and discrimination that he experienced on his return. Yet his gallant actions were a great equalizer and showed that racial barriers of the most insidious and brutal form could be conquered. He remains a true exemplar of his time. And during the 1901 royal tour of the Duke of Duchess and Duchess of Cornwall in York, the future King George V and Queen Mary, the royal couple, were being paraded through the streets of Halifax in a carriage as part of the festivities. The Duke saw among the throng of people the elderly William Hall wearing the Victoria Cross, that universal symbol of valor. He had the carriage stop and got out to talk to Mr. Hall, to find out in what action he had earned his medal, the Victoria Cross. Even for the future king, the sight of a Victoria Cross recipient was indeed very rare. After this, in every official event, to fully recognize his historic service. Now, whether it's on stamps, coins, the naming of a day, or the worship in his honor, I join with all Nova Scotians today to celebrate the enduring legacy of this great Canadian hero. I say, Happy William Hall Day. And I wish all of you, as we continue to celebrate.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to join you virtually to celebrate Nova Scotia Heritage Day. It's a time to celebrate the people, places, and events that have contributed to this province's proud history. And today we celebrate one Nova Scotian whose legacy still inspires a sense of pride, not just within this province, but within the Canadian Armed Forces and across the country. I can't think of a more fitting honoree to mark this day than Petty Officer First Class William Hall. Hall's life, like many across this great province, was defined by the sea, ships, and most of all, service. He built vessels in the shipyards of Hantsport before eventually joining the crew of a merchant Navy vessel, visiting many of the world's busiest ports before he turned 18. He continued traveling after enlisting in the Royal Navy in 1852, serving aboard several ships and receiving British and Turkish medals for his service. It was in 1859, 165 years ago, that Hall received the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest award for bravery. He was the first Black person, the first Nova Scotian, and the third Canadian awarded this prestigious medal. Despite his lifelong dedication and service to this country, Hall was buried in an unmarked grave without military honors when he passed away. Unfortunately, this was not a reality not only for Hall, but for so many other Black veterans. And during Black History Month in particular, we reflect on his service and that of the many Black veterans who fought for our country. Hall's legacy carries on in Nova Scotia and across Canada. In his honor, the Royal Canadian Navy's 4th Arctic and Offshore Patrol Ship bears his name, HMSC William Hall, and it will be commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy later this year. That ship will embark on missions at home and abroad, supporting the Royal Canadian Navy in defending Canada, our way of life, and our friends around the world. It is one of 6 ships that will make up the core of the Canadian Armed Forces' naval capabilities and presence in the Arctic. And it is being built right here in Halifax, a city with a rich naval history, just an hour away from where Hall built wooden merchant ships as a young man. I'd like to thank the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia, relatives of Petty Officer First Class William Hall, and the entire community for organizing today's event. And thank you for preserving his.
I'd like to also thank Minister Blair, but I know you left me. That's all right. I'd like to call on Rear Admiral Josie Kurtz, Commander of the Maritime Forces Atlantic, to give some remarks, please.
Your Honors, Minister, distingués invités, good morning everyone, bonjour tout le monde, and thank you for being here. It's a pleasure for me to join you on this Heritage Day to celebrate Hall, whose story is not only a hallmark of Nova Scotia's rich Black and African history, but also an example of service and dedication to everyone, regardless of our individual backgrounds. William Hall est un modèle pour tout le monde, quelles que soient nos origines ou notre histoire personnelle. I'm Rear Admiral Jose Kurtz, and as Commander of Maritime Forces Atlantic, I have the honor to lead the generation of naval assets ready to protect and defend Canada and its interests here at home and abroad. I also have the great privilege to sit in an office from which I can see the Atlantic Fleet going about their business every day, including the newest ship to have joined the fleet last fall, HMCS William Hall. And let me tell you, it's the best view in the world. Now, the name of a warship is a symbol of Canada that represents our nation's values to the world. A warship, while certainly built for military purposes, is an ambassador of Canada, pulling into ports around the world with the Canadian flag flying at its mast. Given the phenomenal seafaring that was accomplished by Petty Officer First Class William Hall, I can only imagine how happy he would be to get back to sea and to return to ports he may have visited once before. Il serait probablement ravi aussi de découvrir de nouvelles destinations à bord d'un navire moderne parmi la diversité d'un équipage contemporain. The life and service of Petty Officer First Class William Hall was extraordinary, but not out of the ordinary for what has become one of many legacies of African Nova Scotia, a legacy of excellence and service to community and country. From the Victoria Rifles, the No. 2 Construction Battalion, the Military and Community Service Oliver, whose ambitions helped create the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia. Over and over again, African Nova Scotians have risen in dedication to the betterment of Nova Scotia and of Canada. And this, in spite of the challenge of overwhelming odds and disparaging treatment. I have deep admiration for your community's rich heritage, et je m'engage à en apprendre davantage sur votre patrimoine exceptionnel et vos accomplissements remarquables. But I also know that we still need to do better by you. And I hope that through welcoming HMCS William Hall to the fleet, we can shape a journey of building strong bonds together. Historically, Canadian warships have been named after regions, rivers, and cities, an ode to our expansive geography. Les noms de nos navires ont historiquement été représentatifs de la géographie canadienne. Indeed, for the past 30 years, nearly all our ships have been named after cities across the country. And so the crews of these ships become a micro-community and establish a unique connection through affiliation work and by adopting the culture of their namesake cities. Many of us never forget our times in those ships. Personally, I will always remember my time in HMCS Ville de Québec as the ship's first navigator. In Quebec City, for the commissioning ceremony, at a local restaurant, I was offered a beer that bore the name of the ship's motto. Don de Dieu, une devise, une étiquette, le début d'une conversation. A simple phrase fostered connection between a sailor and the namesake city of a brand new ship. Now, fast forward 30 years from now, and I hope that you'll have an admiral standing before a crowd at an event of some kind have made on board HMCS William Hall with the community. So today, for the first time in Canadian history, there's a class of ships that is named after heroes whose astounding feats of bravery are a defining moment in Canadian naval history. By naming a ship after Petty Officer First Class William Hall, the Royal Canadian Navy is asking to join your community in honoring his legacy. We're asking to share his history and the story of African Nova Scotia around the world. Every day, we will speak his name. Our sailors will learn his story, your story, and it will become the foundation of the ship's community and a bond between us. Pour vous transmettre leur message. Although they are at sea working through the first intensive set of trials, testing the ship's equipment and capabilities for employment in future operations, they didn't want to miss in today's agenda. I know they are here in spirit, and they kindly offered the following video. Everyone, the crew of HMCS William Hall.
I am Commander Scott Kellerman, Commanding Officer, HMCS William Hall. Welcome everyone to Nova Scotia Heritage Day. It is with sincere disappointment that HMCS William Hall is away from port on this incredibly important day. We are at sea, continuing the fundamental training to bring the ship fully into the fleet and ready to commence operations in Canadian and international waters. It is this process that will enable us to bring William Hall's story not only to a multitude of Canadian ports, but to cities and countries across other continents.
It's all very exciting to be the first sailors headed out to sea on this new ship, representing William Hall while sailing on behalf of the Royal Canadian Navy. To have had the opportunity to watch the crew grow and come together from 5 of us in the shore office to a full ship's company now ready to go to sea, it's just been such an unforgettable experience. There's a real sense of pride being part of the commissioning crew and honoring William Hall's legacy.
It's been said he was as steady as a rock under fire. William Hall was the first black man, first Nova Scotian, and the first Canadian sailor ever to receive the highest honor in the British Empire, the Victoria Cross. He was a hero in the most literal sense of the word, but he was initially buried with no military honors in an unmarked grave in the Canadian East Coast. And it would be 3 decades until that changed. His local community paved the way to eventually ensure his body be reburied at the Hansport Baptist Church near Minas Basin in Nova Scotia in 1945. In 1947, a memorial was built to honor Hall's legacy. Born to former African-American slaves in 1829, William Hall and his sisters grew up along the banks of the Avon River. Hall dreamed of little more than ships. Watching his father work in the shipbuilding yards of Hansport, Nova Scotia, his parents, Jacob and Lucinda Hall, escaped their slave owners during the War of 1812 to find their way to some semblance of freedom in Nova Scotia. Hall eventually followed his father's professional footsteps, working in those same shipyards as a young man, before enlisting in the Merchant Navy in the early 1840s. In 1852, at just 17 years of age, William Hall joined the Royal Navy in Nova Scotia, where he served for no less than 24 years, eventually rising to the rank of quartermaster.
William Hall was a sailor and a war hero. He was the first person of African ancestry, the first Nova Scotian, and the first Canadian sailor to be awarded Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor. The feeling of walking on board for the first time and knowing that I'm the first coxswain and the first black coxswain of HMCS William Hall is poetic. I mean, I believe the story of my career, specifically my training and the challenges and sacrifices that I made, guided me to this exact point in time, where I was blessed with the opportunity to be the first black coxswain of a Royal Canadian Navy ship that was named after such a distinguished war hero.
Sailors are proud of their ship, and we are eager to share that with everyone. To have our namesake named as the focus for this Heritage Day is both exciting and an indication of how powerful and important William Hall is as a symbol. His legacy is one of honor, professional excellence, and stoic resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. He was a shipbuilder and a sailor. For a ship in the RCN, having so recently been constructed and having entered the fleet, that makes him the perfect role model around which we can rally.
It's a very unique experience to be one of the first sailors in the Royal Canadian Navy to sail on the HMCS William Hall. His naval resume speaks for itself. William Hall demonstrated heroic efforts at the Siege of Lucknow, leading to him being awarded the Victoria Cross.
I think that William Hall's actions during the second relief of Lucknow were an exemplary demonstration of core military values of duty and courage in the face of battle. He was a true war hero, and I feel a strong sense of pride to serve aboard a ship that bears his name.
As someone who was born and raised in Nova Scotia, it's just such an honor to represent an incredible Nova Scotian. I love being able to share the stories of his bravery and achievements with others.
It feels awesome to be the first sailors headed to sea on this new ship and representing William Hall while sailing on behalf of the Royal Canadian Navy. Going on adventures like this is exactly what I joined to do. Not only is this going to be a very fun experience at sea in rough Atlantic waters, but it feels very special to get to learn the ins and outs of the fleet's newest platform.
We are incredibly pleased to see his history, family, and story being celebrated this year in so public and positive a fashion. We look forward to future engagements and working with the local community to keep William Hall's story alive.
First of all, I want to thank you, Rear Admiral Josie Kurtz, and especially for having the crew to be able to speak here today. This is a historic event. That was very, very special. And you can see that they're very proud to be on that ship. I'd like to now call on retired Chief Superintendent Craig Gibson, sponsor HMCS William Hall, and he's also a descendant. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Your honors, distinguished guests, members of the Royal Canadian Navy, descendants and relatives of William Hall, ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls are here today, so it's nice to see the youth here as well. I am happy to be here today at the Halifax Naval Museum on Heritage Day to pay honor to William Hall. William Hall received the country's highest award for his valor and bravery. He was a shipbuilder, a naval sailor, and a naval hero who accomplished things at a time when diversity and equality were not the common language. As a Canadian and as a proud Nova Scotian from Kings County, from the small black community of Gibson Woods, I am truly humbled and very proud to be here today and to select to serve as the sponsor for His Majesty's Canadian ship, William Hall, the Royal Canadian Navy's 4th Arctic and Offshore Patrol vessel. And it was nice to see in the video, my cousin, Ethel Gibson, often referred to as Miss Ethel, was in that picture. That's how I learned about William Hall. And I refer to her, and everybody knows her as Miss Ethel Gibson. As I mentioned, growing up in Gibson Woods, it was her where I first became aware of William Hall. I saw the pride and joy as she talked about William Hall and spoke of his heroic events that took place for that. She spoke often of Black history in Nova Scotia and the importance of getting a good education and learning the history of the province and the community as well. Today, the life and legacy of William Hall is also sustained by the community of Hansport, the Royal Canadian Legion, and the Black Culture Society, along with other different communities as well, such as in the Heritage Center in Shelburne. In History Month, before I became a sponsor of HMC William Hall, I had the opportunity to speak at a lot of the local schools and on the radio about William Hall. And several times at the schools, people would ask about William Hall, so I was very happy to be able to share about him. Next week, I have an opportunity to also speak at places such as the municipality, the County of Kings, and tomorrow the local schools sharing the legacy of William Hall. So I've met with Commander Kellerman on several occasions, ma'am. He even invited me to go, as you know, on board when they took control of the ship from the Irving Dockyard. Now, I don't know if they was just testing my sea legs or not, but I was able to stand fast, and it was nice to see you to welcome the crew there as well, William Hall. So it's been a very gratifying experience to be able to see the pride with the crew as well. I had the opportunity to meet them on several occasions. It is an honor to be associated with the Royal Canadian Navy, and I look forward to being an active champion for the ship, the crew, and the legacy of William Hall, attending as many functions as possible to celebrate and share the history of this fine gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. I don't want to say all the titles behind your name, you know what I mean? I would now like to call on Jacob Sampson to do an artistic presentation on William Hall. He is the Associate Artistic Director of 2B Theater.
Thank you and good morning. I'm going to start with a video. My name is William Hall. I am the son of two strong, smart, spirited people. Two strong, smart, spirited people that happened to be slaves. Now, why were they slaves? Because their parents were. And their parents before them, and how did that cycle start? It's amazing what could happen because of one boat trip. That's a piece of a monologue that I wrote 10 years ago. It's the first piece of theater I ever wrote, and I can't stand it. I laugh at my big old round face, the way I have my head tilted ever so slightly up, my goofy haircut that I did myself. And did I mention my big old round beardless face? Seriously, my beard is the only reason I can fake that I have a chin. But all vanity aside, the real struggle I have is with the writing. It starts right away with me equating being torn from your home and forced into enslavement as just one boat trip. And I don't know if it's because the world has changed or if it's because I have, but so much differently now. My name is Jacob Sampson. I grew up in the Valley, and I'm a theater maker. When we make theater, what we're interested in is empathy, the human experience, the fine details that make up someone's character. If you were to watch the rest of that video, you would see me try to honor William Hall, the war hero, the first black person, first Nova Scotian, and third Canadian to win the Victoria Cross, the British military's highest award for valor. It is inspiring. But what I wish I wrote more about was the man. I wish I spoke about his life before the Victoria Cross, and the fact that he was born free in Nova Scotia at a time when other black people were still slaves. I wish I spoke more about his heroic deeds, but also about the tolls and horrors of war and the effect that that must have had on him. I wish I had spoke more about the fact that outside of war, he traveled the world and saw incredible things, and that after all that, he decided to come home to Nova Scotia. A complex world that he lived in, like you might get if we were watching a play together. Lights fade dimly up to reveal a black man as he saws away at thick, heavy planks of lumber. He's strong and broad, and he moves intentionally. The lights continue to rise, and reveal the scaffolding of a massive ship. A young boy, balancing on the top beam, carrying a bucket of nails, rushes from left to right with the skill of a tightrope walker. This is young William Hall. He lowers the bucket of nails to black men on the middle deck with a hook on a rope and speaks to them very briefly. The man sawing calls to the boy. The boy skillfully climbs down the scaffolding and lands in front of the man. This is Jacob Hall, 35, William's father. He speaks with the Virginian accent, and he scolds young William for talking to those men. Before William can respond, his father explains that William has never known anything but freedom. He was born in it, but that those men aren't. They're slaves. And that they can talk to them at church, help them when they can, but only when there aren't eyes around to notice. Son, it's too much of a risk to them and us. Lights shift. 30-year-old William Hall stands at attention in his finest dress uniform. Sitting in front of him is the admiral of the fleet, his captain, and a panel of other stern-faced commanding officers. William recounts with precision the heroic events that led to the recommendation that he be awarded the Victoria Cross, sometimes half shouting the yes sirs and no sirs of a good soldier. His face is stoic, but with every new detail we begin to see his eyes reflect the loss, cost, and burden of war. His hand lightly shakes as he begins to speak of friends dying around him. His jaw tightly clenches as he remembers the fate of the prisoners. His chest tightens as he describes the damage and destruction of the holy place of worship, the mosque. And for a brief moment, he reflects on his own holy place of worship back in Hansport. As the soldier stands at full salute and his formal recommendation for the Victoria Cross is read, he swallows, and flickers of emotion cross his glistening eyes. Where does heroism end and survival begin? Lights shift. We're in a sitting room in a farmhouse in Hansport, Nova Scotia. Fine October afternoon in 1902. A well-dressed reporter has been looking for the kind, gentle old man that the village says is a war hero. The walls are adorned with great British warships and marsh to speak about his time in the Navy. Finally, the question he's been avoiding is asked. Tell me about the cross. His large, weather-worn hands gently reach for a wooden cigar box off the mantel. He empties out the contents on the table in the middle of the room with a clatter. He picks up the watch chain that has hanging from it the Victoria Cross. He hands it over. In a resolved tone, he tells the reporter, "It's nothing to have the cross now. They're thick as peas, but gives me an extra 10 pounds on my pension, which is the only reason me and my sisters are able to survive." The reporter hands back the medal and is staggered when the old man tells him that after winning the cross, he was offered a prestigious position in London at Whitehall, the seat of government. Why not take the job? It will afford you a more comfortable life. William puts the medals back in the wooden box, replaces them on the mantel, runs his fingers along the hand-carved wood and says, "It's like I told them. I just want to spend my days in the old place, land of my birth. But thank you very much for taking note of me." Lights fade dimly to black. Thank you for allowing me to honor this Nova Scotia giant in my own way. To honor him by exploring the complexity of a life lived during enslavement, emancipation, colonial expansion. To honor William Hall, the maritimer who, after sailing all over the world to places like China, Russia, Singapore, India, after seeing all that, from high British splendor to the horrors of war, and being offered a comfortable life in an esteemed office that through it all, William Hall chose the old place. William Hall chose home. William Hall chose Nova Scotia. I want to thank the province of Nova Scotia for recognizing William Hall this Heritage Day. I want to thank those who reached out to myself and our team at 2B Theatre to create this piece. Thank you to Russell Gross, Riel Williams, the Black Cultural Center, Megan Howard from the Department of Community Culture, Tourism and Heritage Unity.
Well, Jacob, it was 10 years ago you wrote it, but you sure improved on yourself. You strengthened the core of who you are, and it definitely came through today. So I want to thank you very much, because you could tell it was from the heart, and it's from your soul and the core of who you are. And it means a lot, because it was so quiet in here. It was breathtaking. Everyone was captured. So that's exceptional. I want to thank you. Now I would like to call on Petty Officer First Class Corey Tynes to introduce the guest speaker. Come on in, Corey.
Good morning, Your Honors, Admiral, distinguished guests of Commander Paul Smith. Feel very honored being from Halifax, Nova Scotia myself and third generation Navy. Commander Paul Smith was born in Lyalltown, Jamaica and grew up in North York, Ontario. He enrolled in the Naval Reserve at HMCS York while posted to Esquimalt, British Columbia. Commander Paul Smith obtained his commission to the rank of sub-lieutenant and later earned his bridge watchkeeping certificate. After completing naval warfare officer training, he was posted back to Canada's East Coast Fleet and served in several positions. Commander Smith took command of HMCS Kingston, and in doing so, became the first black ship's Canadian captain in the Royal Canadian Navy. While in command, he participated in the search for the lost Franklin expedition ships, HMS Erebus and Terror, in Canada's Arctic, conducted exercises with the standing NATO Mine Countermeasures Group, led counter-drug patrols in the Caribbean Sea as part of Op Carib, and served as task force commander in support of the Royal Canadian Navy's first deployment to the Gulf of Guinea region in over 13 years. Notable post-sea command positions included work with partner nations in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Commander Smith was later appointed Commandant of Naval Fleet School Atlantic before returning to Toronto to command HMCS York. Commander Smith is blessed with an incredibly supportive wife and two amazing sons. It's my pleasure to introduce Commander Paul Smith.
Good morning, everyone. Your Honors, Minister Gross, Admiral, friends, guests, and shipmates. The thing about going last is that a lot of what's in your speech has already been said, so please excuse me if I go off script a little bit. To say that I'm honored to be here to talk about William Hall on this Heritage Day is an understatement. I'm at once overwhelmed and feeling quite unprepared. I say that because in the room, this distinguished group, we have historians, we have senior military personnel, we have people who know more about the life of William Hall than I do, including family members. So it's a bit of a daunting task to go last, but I'll see what I can do. I'd also like to thank the Black Cultural Center for not only hosting this event, but for asking me to speak. I'm going to talk a little about my personal experiences, and when I started sailing here in Halifax, it was a bit of a shock to me. I was unaware of the depth and the strength of the African Nova Scotian communities. It was explained to me at an early age when I was walking through a dockyard and saw the only other person that looked like me, that there is a strong heritage here and that there's a strong history. And I was always sort of taken aback by the fact that we consider it African Nova Scotian history, which it is. But the more I learned, the more I realized it's Canadian history. And this history has to be taught, it has to be learned. And so I started my own learning journey. I was fortunate to command a couple of warships, and in commanding HMCS Summerside for a couple of years. I got to participate in a lot of operations. But I like to take things a step further when I did that and explore, use it as an opportunity to explore the heritage. So I first learned about the Nova Scotian settlers, the Black Loyalists. I'm sure everybody in the room is aware of it, but at the time I wasn't aware of that history. And I learned that when I had the opportunity to lead the first deployment to Western Africa in 13 years. The mission was to conduct training, was to train our partner nations, was to participate in a couple of exercises. But I decided to take it a step further. And after talking with the Black Cultural Center and members of the African Nova Scotian community, somebody said, why don't you explore the history of the Black Loyalists, of the Nova Scotian settlers? One of our stops during that mission was in Freetown, Sierra Leone. Prior to leaving, I did some reading and realized that Freetown, Sierra Leone was founded by Nova Scotians. A group known as the Nova Scotian settlers freed slaves from the American Revolutionary War, who used the Underground Railroad to form communities right here in Nova Scotia, and then petitioned the British government for their own ships to find their own homeland. They sailed across the Atlantic. I tried to mimic the route as much as possible, just to honor that group of sailors, until we got to Freetown, Sierra Leone. Now, Freetown, Sierra Leone, the city itself, is pretty high up, almost on a mountain, on a steep hill from where we docked. And right at the top, there was a cotton tree. And that tree was where the Nova Scotian settlers first had their meals, first prayed and thanked God for their safe arrival into their new colony, their new country that they could call their own. 337 years later, HMCS Summerside and myself had an opportunity to go and see that cotton tree that was still standing there. Sadly, the tree was felled about 4 years ago in a storm. But it was inspirational to me, and it was incredibly moving to connect that part of my history that I didn't know. Before I left, I had petitioned the provincial government for some gifts to present to their counterparts to acknowledge that history. When I got over there and speaking with the High Commissioner at the time, and I don't mean to speak ill of the High Commissioner by telling the story, she's wonderful and we're still in touch. But I brought up that story of the Nova Scotian settlers and thought that at the reception we were going to hold the next evening, it would be wonderful to connect the two. Canada was celebrating her 150th, they were celebrating their 335th, and I thought it would just bring the histories together. Given that the High Commissioner was newly accredited in the area, she felt it wasn't best for us to do that as a first step because there was an understanding that what has Canada done since, despite being there for the Ebola crisis, despite being there for the aiding in their civil war, it was felt that this was more of a diplomatic mission. And so being the senior, she being the senior Canadian, of course I acquiesced. The night of the reception, their Chief of Defense Staff spoke first. And he said, "Isn't it wonderful to have Nova Scotia back home?" Isn't it wonderful to have the people that founded this country come here and recognize on our birthday? The second person to speak was the Transport Minister. "Welcome home, Nova Scotia. Isn't it great to be here?" And it went on and on and on like this for the evening. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the High Commissioner changing her speech on her iPad. I tell that story a little bit in jest, but I tell it to highlight how well regarded Canada is on the international stage, how much our history has affected so much of the world, and how little it's represented here. On the other side of the Atlantic, I had school children performing the founding of their country. The young lady who had the honor of carrying the Nova Scotian flag was the one who had the highest marks in school. and it was an extreme honor for her. She was so happy. Yet on this side, I tell the story from time to time, and I'm told, that's the first I've heard about that. That's incredible. While we do a great job of understanding parts of our history, we do a not so good job of telling it to the next generation. History is an amazing thing because it's incredible when it happens, it's difficult, it's easily lost, and difficult to regain. We have to remember before we can reteach, before we can learn, before we can fully understand, and eventually fully appreciate. Days like this is part of that chain, fully appreciating our history, understanding the sacrifices and contributions made by William Hall. And for me personally, it serves as an inspiration. I served in uniform for going on 38 years now, and I've had different points in my career where I've needed a little bit of motivation. The story of William Hall, the story of service long before me, at a time where someone who looked like me wasn't welcome, wasn't understood, wasn't appreciated, yet still found the determination and the drive to do what he knew was the right thing. He's a legend, a hero. It's part of the legacy. And those accolades are not the reason he committed himself to a life of service. It was just doing the right thing. If that doesn't stand as an inspiration to everyone, I'm not sure what will. The second part of my learning had to do with the No. 2 Construction Battalion. Again, another story that I really didn't understand when I first started sailing and when I first started looking into the history. I tie those two together, and what an incredible heritage this Black community has. These stories are understood now on a national level. It's not about the stamps, it's not about the paintings, all wonderful acknowledgments of these great accomplishments, but it's about the teaching. It's about spreading the word of what we have accomplished, what we have to give to the national tapestry, the accomplishments of an entire community, the resilience of that community cannot be understated. I came into it late. I hope the next generation doesn't. I know that there's a generation of soldiers, sailors, business leaders, community leaders coming behind that are, this knowledge is being used as a tool to make a better future. And I'm glad that a small part of it. I'm honored to be here today. I'm glad to say that I stood at William Hall Day and acknowledged such a wonderful person in front of a group of such accomplished and distinguished people. It's a true honor to me, and I hope the story keeps getting written. I hope the story keeps getting taught, and I hope this part of truly Canadian history continues to be explored by generations long after me. Thank you very much.
I don't want to see you if you are prepared. No. Okay, Russell, I know. Russell just gave me the eye. But you were very prepared because when you were going through your life, you were being prepared for here. That's your part of your journey. So you should be extremely proud of yourself. And I know this is just the beginning and there's more to come. And it's great you passed it on because you made another key point, is to pass this on to the youth and also to the people who, I don't want to say older, but for everyone, because no one knows if no one is told. So you said an extremely excellent point there. And today is the day that we are passing it on. So thank you. Now I'd like to give special thanks to the following: Government of Nova Scotia, Department of Communities, Culture, Heritage, and Tourism, Heritage Day Committee, Halifax Naval Museum, 2B Theater, Christian Barry, and Jacob Sampson, Maritime Forces, Atlantic. And at this point, I would like to ask everyone to stand for the departure of your honors. And thank you very much for coming.